2, 1, go. Careful. What are you doing? Are you okay?
It's a game that needs very little in the way of introductions, but seeing as this is a podcast about rally games, it's probably a good idea that I give it one. In this episode of Power Drifting, we take a look at the game that launched the Flying Scotsman into the living rooms of the PlayStation generation and kick-started one of the greatest rally franchises in gaming. This is Colin McRae Rally. Hello, my name is Tom, and I'm joined once again on another episode of Power Drifting by my co-host, Mike Phelan. How are you doing, Mike? You all right?
Good afternoon, Tom. Good afternoon. It's good to be here again, talking about one of the greats.
Yeah. This one has been a game that has kind of been. It's like our Everest. It's been there looming on the horizon for so long. I kind of not pussyfooted around it, but I wasn't sure how to approach it because it's such a well-known and well-loved game in the rally genre that it almost feels like it's one of those games that it needs to be treated with, like, special, not kid gloves, but a lot of respect, just because of how many people love it and just how well revered it is, really.
Yeah.
Again, obviously, we're talking about the great Colin McRae Rally. We're mainly talking about the PlayStation version of the game here. I know it was released on Windows. It was released on PlayStation and on Windows back in the mists of time, Mike. Back in July 1998 on the PlayStation in Europe, and in January 2000 in North America, and then on the PC in September 98 in North America in February 2000. We spoke about this a little bit just before we came on and started recording, but we throw around these dates on this podcast, 1995, 1996, 1998. I was thinking about this earlier on. 1998 was 23 years ago. And I don't know about you, but it seems like a blink of an eye. It's just gone like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're both getting old, and it just everything's melded into one sort of long year.
Well, yeah, especially with current events happening. But yeah, just on that topic of 1998, I was thinking about this again earlier. I was like, God, I can remember the World Cup. I can remember Michael Owen scoring that goal against Argentina. When he scored that wonder goal.
Yeah.
Other things from 1998, off the top of my head, I owned an N64 at the time, so a lot of my time in 1998 was taken up with The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time.
Sure.
That game really defined that period for me. Obviously, it was before the Dreamcast had come out, but after I'd owned a Saturn. Were you a PC gamer at this time?
I was, yeah. So, 97 to 99, I was just PC. So, I would have been playing. It's 1998. If I remember rightly, July 98 actually was the same month that I won Letter of the Month in PC Gamer.
Is that when you won that steering wheel?
I won a force feedback steering wheel, which, funnily enough, I believe I did play with Colin McRae Rally.
Yeah, because you mentioned this on the Mobile One Rally Championship episode that you'd won a force feedback wheel, and you played that game with it as well. So that's cool. Was your experience with this game first of all on the PC then?
Yeah, I think I played. I think it was a demo, probably back in mid '98, I presume, or late '98, I presume. I played it a little bit on the PC. For some reason, it didn't click on me on the PC. Whatever reason it was, I think I was playing Rally Championship and other games. But I then, when I was doing my retro sort of revisits in the early 2000s, I played on the PS1, and it very, very quickly became one of my favourites alongside Toka 1 and 2. Yeah.
Interesting, yeah. Obviously from the same developer, Codemasters.
I love Codemasters. I've said it on the podcast before.
Yeah.
I could quite happily live with Codemasters games only for the rest of my life and be perfectly content.
High praise indeed. High praise. Yeah, as I say, I had an N64 at this period, and then I went from the N64 to the Dreamcast. So I only came to this game a few years later, probably a little bit like yourself. And I played it on the PlayStation. Didn't really touch PC gaming back then. I had played it at a friend's who had a PlayStation, but only briefly, and it did stick out to me just because of how good the car handling was. We will talk about this as we go through the discussion on the game. But yeah, that was the main thing that grabbed me about this game. I mean, it looked decent as well, but it was so easy to pick up and play. It was it's like the Soul Calibur of racing games.
Sure.
It was like
Yeah.
easy to pick up, but difficult to master.
Yep.
So yeah, let's talk about that in a little while. First of all, let's talk a little bit about the game's kind of lineage and history. It's worth mentioning at this point that we're only going to talk mainly about the PlayStation and the PC versions of this game. There was a Game Boy Color version released, and it was developed by a company called Spellbound Entertainment, and it was released only in Europe, and that was in September 2001, so quite some time after the console versions. But yeah, we're primarily focusing on the PlayStation and the PC version in this episode. So yeah, developed by Codemasters, published by Codemasters in Europe, published curiously by Sony in the United States. The game is based on the 1998 World Rally Championship, but doesn't actually have an official WRC license. And as you've correctly stated, Mike, this game followed in the footsteps of Toka Touring Cars on the PlayStation. Was it on the PC as well, Toka Touring Cars? I'm sure it was.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, sure it was.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, and it's curious actually that it's based on the fame of Colin McRae. Obviously, Colin McRae was a household name at that period, just because he'd been the 1995 World Rally Champion. And I think we touched on this in our Dirt 5 episode. But Tommy Mäkinen was the champion consistently from 1996 through to 1999. So why they settled on Colin McRae as the sort of the celebrity endorsement for this game is quite curious.
Sure.
I can't really find out any information why, other than maybe it was because Codemasters was a British developer and they wanted to put a British rally driver on the front of the box. I don't know.
I think so. I think, or possibly something to do with the Subaru licensing as well. Obviously, it was prominently displayed on the front of the game, wasn't it? But I think McRae was, we say his household name. I think people outside of the UK will probably think that we're talking rubbish, because I think it was only in the UK that he was a household name. He won Sports Personality of the Year in '95 or '96, I believe, and really it was the first time where rally personalities, rally drivers were as famous as he was. It was revolutionary to an extent. It really did make everyone in the UK suddenly a rally fan, which was quite a change, really.
Just going off the influences of other games, and again, things we mentioned this in our very first episode, actually, the Sega Rally episode. The influence that game, Sega Rally, had on the making of Colin McRae Rally. I found an interview with the producer of the first 4 Colin McRae games, a guy called Guy Walday. He spoke to Edge. This is in issue 145. And there's a feature called The Making of Colin McRae Rally. And he says in that interview that, I'll just quote here, so the basic premise for the game was based around the car handling in Sega Rally. Everyone who played it loved the way the cars behaved on the different surfaces, especially the fact that you could slide the car realistically on the loose gravel. The car handling remains excellent to this day, and it's still an arcade machine I enjoy playing given the chance. He also cites Screamer Rally and, quite oddly I thought, Wave Race 64 as an influence on the car handling. So yeah, that's quite interesting. Sorry, can you hear that? There's a motorbike outside, sort of revving its engine. Yeah.
Gives a bit of background to the podcast.
Yeah, of course. It's either that or my washing machine. So yes, influenced by the great Sega Rally, the developers actually cite the game as an influence. Let's talk a little bit about the gameplay modes that you presented with when you first start the game up. So you've got a time trial, you've got a single rally, there's a championship mode, and a rally school. Pretty standard options within in a racing game of the time.
Yep.
The difference is that this game, Colin McRae, has over its contemporaries is that I believe it was one of the first console rally games to basically ditch the almost arcade style of racing against other vehicles for a more realistic take on rally. So it was basically point to point, you against the clock, and competitors who would do the same run. Whereas other cars, like other racing titles of this type, like V-Rally, were mainly against AI vehicles. And I think that's really what kind of stood this one apart. It was going for a more realistic stance as opposed to an arcade racing game set in a rally environment. Speaking of environments, there are 8 in total, and these are You've got New Zealand, Greece, Monte Carlo, Australia, Sweden, Corsica, Indonesia, and the UK. Now, there's 6 courses within each environment, and these are based on the actual 1998 World Rally Championship. Curiously, though, and doing some actual research into this, Indonesia, the real rally in 1998 was cancelled, apparently
Yeah.
due to civil unrest.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting that they left it in the game, maybe just to have some some variety in the different places that you could race.
Yeah, I think Indonesia was a real popular destination for all rally games in the 90s and 2000s, wasn't it? I think it's a jungle sort of setting, isn't it?
Yeah, very
It's a
tropical.
different setting. Yeah, it's a very different setting than, driving around Wales.
Yeah, and interestingly as well, you say Wales. In the UK rallies, you've got places like the Forest of Bowland, which, I mean, I'm sure actual rallies take place there, but they don't take place in the World Rally Championship. So it was,
Sure.
I think, by not having an official WRC license, they had the freedom to kind of flex the creative muscle, if that's what you want to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, to put some interesting locations in there. The tracks themselves, they don't have variable weather or time of day. It's like kind of locked to the track, so you can't change the it to be snowy or rainy or whatever. But there is a good mix of environments. So you've got your snow in Monte Carlo, and you've got your arid Australian and Greek courses.
Yeah.
And then you've got your rainy and grey UK. And interestingly, no Finland, which was a surprise. And just going back again to the real life 1998 World Rally Championship, Colin McRae retired on the Finland course, I think on stage 5. Mm-hmm. Tommy Mäkinen won it. Mm-hmm. So there you go, Rally Fact fans. Maybe that's why they didn't put it in the game now. Bad memories for Colin, Vehicle-wise, you've got 12 in total, and they're split across 3 different classes. You've got Subaru Impreza WRC, Mitsubishi Lancer Evo 4, Ford Escort WRC, Toyota Corolla WRC. Those are the WRC four-wheel drive cars that you can only race in the intermediate difficulty. If you choose the novice difficulty, you can only use these vehicles. You've got two-wheel drive Renault Maxi Megane, the Seat Ibiza kit car Evo 2, the Volkswagen Golf GTI kit car, and the Skoda Felicia kit car. And it's interesting how they've split the difficulty stages here in this game. So basically, you've got 2 default difficulties. You've got novice and intermediate. And depending on which difficulty level you choose, there's only 1 block of 4 cars open to you. So for intermediate, you've got the WRC four-wheel drive cars. And then for novice, you have the 2-wheel drive kit cars. There's a further difficulty stage that you can open up if you win the championship with intermediate difficulty. And that's the expert mode. And that basically gives you all the cars, but it gives you 4 more as well. So you get the Ford Escort Mark II, the Ford RS2000, the Lancia Delta Integrale, and the Audi Quattro Group B cars, which I have unlocked and do find them to be quite unplayable, to be honest. I prefer the WRC cars or the kit cars. Don't know about you, Mike.
Yeah, I think one thing is it stands out from that list of cars is that it is an iconic list of rally cars. Every single one of them is an iconic in rally games and in rally in itself. But I think the format they've done in terms of the novice difficulty level and the medium difficulty level, or intermediate, is very much it feels like a more natural way of doing difficulty levels. I know about you, but I always feel when you have games that sort of stick difficulty levels in that are just they seem unorganic, whereas in here it does seem like it's a more natural thing where you have the slower cars and the novice difficulty levels. And I think it was probably the first game that did it like this. It sort of set the tone for rally games, didn't it?
Yeah, I can't think of another example where the difficulty level locks what kind of vehicles you use. And in some ways, it's quite an imaginative way of doing things because the 2-wheel drive kit cars do handle. I mean, all the cars in this game handle well, but the kit cars, they're a little bit slower, they turn a little bit faster, and they're just not as easy to slide around.
Yeah.
And it's nice. It's a nice introduction to the game. It's like, here you go, get to learn the controls, and then once you've played, in the novice mode for a bit, try the intermediate, and then that's where the real fun starts. When you get into these like four-wheel drive beasts that you can literally power drift around corners, because that's what they're designed to do. Even in the manual, it says these cars are designed to go around corners sideways. A racing line is not a thing in rally games. You need to basically get around corners sideways, and these cars do it excellently. With the exception, I find of like the things like the Lancia Delta and the Audi Quattro, because I think they're just a bit too fast for this game. They're not really suited to the sort of the pace of the stages, I find, which is a little bit of a letdown when it comes to bonus cars. You'd think that they'd be actually better than the cars that you get to start with, but in this case they're actually not. So it's probably best to stick with the stick with the Impreza, to be honest.
Indeed.
It's on the front of the box for a reason.
Exactly.
Cool. Okay, let's move on and talk a little bit about the different game modes. The main game mode here that a lot of people will play, as with most rally games, dependent, regardless even of the generation that it's played in, is the championship mode. And here it's about as basic and standard as you could probably get. You essentially start. Where'd you start? It's New Zealand you start in. You start in New Zealand and you work your way through the different courses. But you just basically do every stage in sequence. You get a service area. After every 2 stages, you can repair your car, carry on. And it's pretty basic. There's no kind of like crew management or anything like that. I mean, obviously this game is, as we said earlier, from 1998, so that kind of stuff wasn't really a major feature of rally games of the period. But, you know, as a championship mode, it's fairly serviceable, does the job.
Yeah.
What I found is that Colin McRae usually wins everything. Mm-hmm. And even though this game doesn't have the official WRC license, it does have all the real rally drivers from the time. So you'll generally get, Colin McRae will finish top usually. You'll get people like Richard Burns in there. I can't remember if Tommy Mackinnon's in this game or not. Colin McRae generally finishes first. And this led me to a little bit of an existential mystery. Because when you are racing in this game, you have Nicky Grist as your co-driver.
Yep.
Who's Colin McRae got as a co-driver? Nicky Grist can't be in both cars.
That's very. You see, that's not. Yeah. Well, maybe it's Nicky Grist's sort of like long lost brother, and sort of. Yeah, you've blown my mind a little bit there, Tom.
Unless he like hops out. Yeah. Unless he hops out at the end of like Colin McRae's run and then just runs over to your car.
Yeah,
I don't know, maybe. As well as the standard championship mode, you've got a thing called Rally School, which I actually thought was really well done. So Rally School is almost like a play on the Gran Turismo earn your medals kind of thing, earn your license. You don't need to do it, but it's nice just to sort of ease you into the mechanics of the game. And it's the way that it's presented to you is actually really quite cool in a sort of nostalgic way, because your tutorials are delivered via this like CGI rendered TV screen, complete with a VHS machine, and then the videos will play on the TV screen, but they'll fast forward and rewind with like the interference lines that you used to get on a VHS. Yeah. And you'll get Colin McRae himself kind of delivering this very kind of flat, dour tone of deliverance of this tutorial. But you know, it's just really cool that they've actually got him to do it. You know, it's actually Colin McRae giving the tutorial, and I think this is where they got the idea to shoehorn in the Beat Tommy section from Tommy Mackinnon Rally, because they've tried to do the same thing with that, but it's just nowhere near as well done. And Tommy Mackinnon just doesn't want to be there. You can tell from the voiceover. Whereas here, at least Colin McRae is actually putting some effort in.
The aim for this task is to drive in a clockwise direction around the cones laid out in front of you. Try to keep as close to the cones as possible and use the throttle, brakes and handbrake to give a smooth run. Here you will begin to learn to slide the car to gain a tighter circle.
Right then, start off when you're ready. That was good. Hey. Nice one.
Let's talk a little bit about the aesthetic of this game, so the visuals and sound. Now, another element that while they mentioned in his the making of interview with Edge is the way that the mud splatters on the cars, and apparently this hadn't actually been done before in a console rally game. This is the very first game that had this effect, which is quite mind blowing when you think about it, because we just kind of take it for granted now that the cars will get dirty as they go through the mud and through the courses. And this is what he says in the interview. He says, "We had this idea very late in the development of the game, and it would never have made it for the original planned release date. There were many discussions about what we should do, and it was decided that it was an important feature to include and also gave us some more time to spend playtesting the game. It was finally implemented in a quarter of the estimated time, and as far as I'm aware, was the first game to include this feature. For me, it's small details like this that add to the whole immersive experience of the game, and I feel sure that in some small way it added to its success." I 100% agree with that. The only games that I really had played at this time when Colin McRae came out were things like Sega Rally, and I think I'd played V-Rally on the N64 but at this point as well. And I don't think either of those, I know Sega Rally doesn't, I don't think V-Rally does either. I don't think either of them have vehicles that accumulate mud or dirt as you're racing. I mean, I know that's only one small part of the whole kind of aesthetic view of this game, but it's a very important detail, and that's why I kind of brought it up first of all.
I think for rally games, you need to have that. You need to feel like you are battling the environment, don't you?
Totally, yeah. And I think just as an overall package, I think the game delivers so much because it's got a very kind of muted colour palette, and it looks. This is going to sound ridiculous in this day and age saying this, but it actually looks realistic. You know, it is about all kind of grey skies and, you know, fairly kind of muted colour palettes of, you know, the countryside and
it's rough. It's rough in terms of, I don't mean rough in terms of it looks poor. It's rough as in it feels like a rally game. It feels like you are driving this sort of slightly unspectacular in terms of no sort of like showiness to it. It's not Formula One. You're racing in these environments, and I think the PS1 graphics, much maligned nowadays in terms of how pixelated they are, it suits the game perfectly.
Oh, I totally agree. See, I played this game yesterday, and it was initially in my mind the pixelation of PlayStation games. Actually, I think I prefer it to like cleaner games of that period, to like things like N64, where it's like blurry textures. I actually prefer the sort of pixelated, almost bittiness of the graphics because it actually looks more realistic in a certain way. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does, yeah.
When Colin McRae was ported to the PC, when it all looked very clean and very angular, it just didn't have the same. It didn't have the same visual kind of appeal. I don't think it was the sort of the slightly. There's no way I can describe it, but grittiness of the pixels, you know, of the pixelated floor and the trees and everything. You know, it all just looked a bit off, but in some way, just more kind of. I just have massive nostalgia for it.
Yeah.
I don't know why, because I never had this game when it was contemporary, but I can still picture in my mind what the game looks like, and when I play it now, it looks exactly as I remember it. A bit rough around the edges, but just iconic with that, you know, the blue Subaru with the yellow flashes on it, or whichever vehicle you use, really. I just think it's a really nice looking game for its time period. You know, it's one of those games where they did go the extra mile by adding in, like, you know, a fully 3D rendered interior view for pretty much all of the cars. I don't think the bonus cars have interior views, but all the other cars do, complete with some quite crudely modelled driver hands, which, you know...
Famously,
Yeah, I mean, they look a bit naff now, but, I mean, they even went to the trouble of, you know, having the guy change gears, you know, the gear stick and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it looks a bit crude, but it's well done, and it's very indicative of the time period.
Yeah.
Even little details like the windscreen wipers go in, that kind of thing.
Yeah. It's also very sparse as well. It's a very sparse game. You play it nowadays, the environments you'd race on are very sparse, which is I really like that. It reminds me a lot of what the official WRC games did on the PS2, when the environments you did feel like you were really just being dumped in the middle of the wilderness and told to drive, which is what I want. I don't know why.
Yeah. No, I do as well. I mean, that's what I want for a rally game. I want to feel like it's, you know, we've said this before many times, but it's you against nature, really. And one of the things that kind of still surprised me at the time, and it still does to some extent now, is these courses that you race on. They're actually quite interesting in certain places, because a lot of the times it's just, you know, there's a track. You might be like a little bit of a gully, or you can't really drive too far off the beaten path. But what it does do is it's quite forgiving in that it will let you meander off the course. You can drift onto the edges. There are trees at the side, and you can sort of drive through them. But there are other areas where you kind of find yourself in these kind of wide open like meadows or fields. And I've not really tried to drive as far as you can, you know, either left or right. I'm sure eventually you'll come to an invisible wall or something. But there's some quite wide open areas, and in some places, this will always stick with me. I remember the first time I ever played this game, and it was at a friend's house, as I said earlier on. There's a sequence where you drive down into almost like a sort of a quarry, and there's piles of like aggregates or whatever it is at the side, and there's like diggers and stuff, and you're actually driving through them. And I was thinking to myself, this is awesome. You don't get this in Sega Rally, you know. You're driving, you know, there's no barriers at the side of the tracks. It's just like all open. And I just thought the freedom that you were given as a player in this game was just kind of unprecedented at the time.
Yeah.
So it's a very good looking game for the time period, and just the sheer amount of variety really in the courses and the times of day and the weather, everything like that. It was just really refreshing. I mean, sound wise, music pretty unremarkable. As we said earlier, you do get the dulcet tones of Nicky Grist as Colin McRae's real world co-driver in this game. I think he does a good job.
Yeah, iconic.
Yeah. One thing I did notice is that the directions, the pace notes are the other way around in this game. So in a lot of more modern rally games, the lower the number for the cornering, it means the tighter it is. I know there's no universal kind of rule on whether it should be one way or the other, because it can be either way. But I just found it odd going back and playing Colin McRae now with a modern head on and noting that the severity of the corners is reversed. So a 2 is like a sort of a very gradual bend, whereas a 5 is like almost like a hairpin.
Yeah, I think they did that. I think that was the first. I think the first few Colin McRae games might have done that. You know, thinking back, I'm thinking of even like up to Colin McRae 3, maybe even 4. I'm sure they might have done it as well. It's
I think you're right.
fact, actually.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, and like I say, I did look into this. There is no, as far as I can tell, there is no sort of hard and fast rule. It's just that it's kind of been adopted more widely. That's the way it should be done because more people now see it that way. Again, not a massive expert on real life rally. Although I did watch the highlights of the Monte Carlo rally the other day. Did you see that?
I did see the very small part. Yeah.
Yeah, some amazing crashes on there. I was like, me and Kel were both watching it, and there's one where he goes off the side of the track and it smashes into all the trees, and we both went, "Whoa!" because we wasn't expecting it. But yeah, so I like that. I think this sounds pretty good. Oh, and another thing as well is this. I think it's one of the first games I noticed. Anyway, I think Toka might also do this. The further you position the camera from the vehicle, the audio of the engines changes. So the closer the camera is to the vehicle, the louder the engine sound. Also, when you're inside the vehicle, you get more of the sort of the gravel flicking against the sides of the vehicle.
I think Codemasters, right the way up to Dirt, the first Dirt game, they really mastered the sound in these games. They made it sound really realistic and really sort of. We're going to use that word again. We've used it twice today already, but gritty. The entire game sounds gritty, but it sounds realistic and it sounds pretty good compared to something like Sega Rally, which only came out a few years before this, which is not quite so detailed, let's say.
I always think that Codemasters racing games, the engine sounds have like a certain sound to them, and especially from this period in time, this like PlayStation era. And I'll try and describe it. Obviously, we'll put some audio clips in this episode so you can hear what I'm talking about. But there's almost like you've got the sound of the engine, but then there's almost like this kind of there's like a whine that kind of plays inside that sound. And it's I don't know if it's like the intercooler or the turbo of the car that they're trying to like recreate, but it's a very distinct engine sound, and all of the cars in Colin McRae have it. The Toka touring car's engine sounds like this as well, and it's just very indicative of Codemasters racing games of that period.
We will call that from now on the Codemasters hum.
Yeah, not to be confused with the Bristol hum.
Exactly.
That's something entirely different. Yeah.
And now it sounds dodgy, but look it up on the internet. Look up on the internet. Bristol hum.
One left. Over crest. Over crest. Into one left. One right. Into one left. Into two right. Opens.
Let's move on to the star of the show. We've talked about the visuals and the sound and all the different things you can do in this game. The star of this show is undoubtedly the vehicle handling. Again, inspired by Sega Rally, but the blueprint for a lot of other rally titles since this. And going back once again to Edge 145, get me money's worth here, mate, out of this magazine, out of this making of Colin McRae. Guy Wilday, he says in this interview that it was important that people could pick the game up, play it, and enjoy it immediately. But at the same time, we wanted to provide growth for the more experienced player to be able to find special nuances in the behaviour of the car. We wanted the player to feel that they were driving a real rally car, but at the same time, we were very much aware that we wanted an enjoyable game and not a hardcore driving simulation.
Yeah, perfect.
Perfect. It's a perfect summary of the way this game plays. It is literally one of the best handling rally games, bar none, still to this day. I remember when WRC 7 came out a few years ago, and one of the things that people kind of lauded it for was the fact that the handling model kind of ditched ones that had gone before it, and that it was much more like Colin McRae.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that sticks with me because I do remember thinking it was really good. I put a sort of a little, not a review, but like my impressions video up on my YouTube channel that nobody ever looks at. But that video got quite a lot of comments and people kind of agreeing that it does actually feel like an old school Colin McRae game. And that speaks volumes to me.
Yeah.
The fact that you can just pick this game up, as the guy said, play it and enjoy it without having without having any experience of driving games or rally games, it's just an amazing accomplishment. And obviously, it does, as we've said many times on this episode, take a lot of inspirations from Sega Rally. But that's very apparent here, and it almost refines the Sega Rally experience.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think what is important to note is I mentioned this on a podcast before that I understand people saying that rally games feel unrealistic, but again, we must remember this is a PS1 game, and most people who played these games would have been below 16, 15 years old. It was very, very much a formative game for people, and I think that a lot of people who criticise how games aren't realistic don't understand that the most important thing about any video game is how fun it is, and Colin McRae Rally manages to make you think you are driving a rally car with handling that clearly isn't based on it's based on real life in terms of the fact you turn a wheel, but it's not realistic. It's just for fun. And I think I think when games start doing that, any racing game, any game at all really, but any game which remembers that it has to make you think you're driving something. One of the great quotes for, I think it was Dirt 5, in one of the reviews, said that it's a great game for making you think you are the best racing game driver ever. And I think Colin McRae Rally is the first of the games which did that, rally-wise, is that it makes you feel like you are driving a high-powered racing car through these environments. And it's all about the fun. And I think it's really important that Sega Rally did this as well. The Sega Rally is so unrealistic, it's unbelievable. It's not realistic, obviously, but that's not the point. The point is it's fun, and I think that's what this game does so well.
I couldn't agree more, to be honest, Mike. For me, the handling model in this game is practically perfect.
Yeah.
And the fact that it formed the basis of the rest of the Colin McRae series going forward, and a lot of other games took cues from it. And if you picked up a rally game and it didn't play like Colin McRae, it was just like, what's this? I can remember getting Richard Burns Rally. This is a game we'll cover in another episode, I'm sure. But I can remember getting Richard Burns Rally, having recently played something like Colin McRae 3 on the Xbox, getting Richard Burns, putting it in, starting a rally and going, my brain does not like this.
Yeah, great example of a game which went, we're going to make it realistic because we want to be sort of like cool. It's maybe I'm being a bit over the top, but I mean, it's when you forget about the fact it's a game first and the simulation second, then that's when games have problems. And I think it's a genre defining experience, the handling in this game.
It's nice when you can pick up a game and start playing it, and it's actually fun and enjoyable. It makes you it makes you want to keep playing it. So obviously, over the course of this past week, I've been revisiting Colin McRae Rally in preparation for this episode, and I thought, I've not played this for a while, but I'll bang it on and start playing it. And then before I knew it, I was in like the 5th country on the championship because I was just enjoying playing it so much, and a few hours had gone by, and I was just like, I don't feel like I'm like wasting my time. Like some games, they feel like a chore to play. Like this is probably gonna sound really like dismissive, but that new game it's a totally different style of game. So I don't know even know why I'm bringing this up, but that new game, The Medium,
yes,
it came out on the Xbox on Game Pass this last week, and I've tried to play it about 3 times now, and every time I get bored and I just stop playing it. But with Colin McRae Rally, I put it on and I was there for I was just transfixed for about 3 hours, and it's just what does that say, really? I know it's a different type of game, but Yeah,
but it's not, is it? I mean, it's what's incredible, I think, about all this is the fact that this game came out in 1998. It's 23 years ago. 23 years before this game came out, the height of gaming was Space Invaders. In 23 years, the amount of development was huge, and I think at this point is when the turning point came to an extent. I know there were simulation games before, but there was a turning point around this end of the 1990s when every game had to be realistic. Every game had to be, I suppose, serious. Seriousness was a lot heavier in games, and I think
it's po-faced. Po-faced.
It is po-faced, very much po-faced. I think there's a lot of games where you sort of just feel like they're doing this to tick boxes or to just make you think that, to almost make you bored of what you're doing. Colin McRae Rally doesn't do that. Colin McRae Rally remembers that ultimately, despite everything that's gone on since, Colin McRae Rally is basically an offspring of Space Invaders. It is a game which is just based around fun. It's based around enjoyable gaming. And it is. When you said about Sega Rally and how the developers had said how much they'd modelled it on Sega Rally, how much they'd been inspired by Sega Rally, 100%. And I think they also mentioned Screamer Rally, very similar as well in terms of just being fun, colourful. Although in Colin McRae's case, slightly dour colours, but it's a sort of a colourful, fun, and exciting game, and not one which makes you think that you've got to, pass a test or get some kind of license to drive it.
It's not all about serious racing though, and well, we say serious racing, fun racing. There are some excellent cheats in this game, and
yes.
In some ways the cheats are more well known than the actual game itself. And these are mainly entered, or they're mainly activated by entering your name on the name's enter screen with various different combinations of odd words. But some of them I've got here. I'm not going to give you the cheats away. You can look at them. You can look for them on the internet. But some of the cheat modes are actually quite interesting. So you've got things like wobbly cars. So the cars are like made of jelly. There's low gravity where the cars are really bouncy. There's floating cars, which where the car wheels kind of fold up underneath, like the Back to the Future DeLorean, the second film.
Yeah.
You've got things like rear wheel driving. I think that's known as forklift mode. One of the most interesting ones, one of the two most interesting cheat modes, is the 60 frames per second mode, where basically what the game does is it reduces the draw distance and turns off a lot of the like the smoke effects, and I think some of the on-screen display as well. And I'm pretty sure as well it disables the in-car view. And I don't know if that's because the in-car view is rendered at 30 frames a second and they couldn't make it 60 frames. I'm not sure. I'm not a programmer, so don't quote me on that. But I think that's what it would have been. But basically, it boosts it doubles the frame rate from 30 frames a second to 60 frames, which is it's quite nice, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool, yeah. And the fact that they did that and added that as a cheat mode, you might think, well, why didn't they just make that the standard mode? Well, as I said, it kind of reduces a lot of the trackside details. The draw distance is reduced, all the smoke effects are taken away, water splashes are taken away. So that's probably why. It's actually interesting to note as well that Sega Rally 2 also has a 60 frames per second mode, which does pretty much the same thing. And whether or not that was included as an homage to this, because this was an homage to Sega Rally, who can say?
Sure.
I'm not going to say one way or the other, but it's interesting that Sega Rally 2 also has a 60 frames per second mode, as does Colin McRae. Mike, the most famous Easter egg in this game, would you like to explain to the listeners what that is?
So the most famous, it's a very well-known Easter egg in the game is there are certain special stages when you activate the cheat code where you will be abducted by aliens. In the style of numerous 50s and 60s alien abduction reports, and it's interesting. I mean, I think the game has a very British sense of humour. It's a lot of games around this time from British developers. I'm thinking like Team 17, Codemasters. They all did these kind of like slightly wacky, slightly madcap Easter eggs and cheat codes. And Colin McRae does that. And it's the first in a long line of this series doing things like that as well. Maybe not so much in recent years because of a slightly more serious tone to it. But it's. I remember the screenshot. I probably would be PC Gamer magazine, I imagine, back in late 90s when it showed it. I mean, instantaneously, it became one of my favourite games just because of that.
Yeah, I remember seeing it in the free. It was in the free play section of CBG.
Yep.
And I remember looking at that image and thinking, is that real? Is that one of them April? Obviously, it wasn't an April Fool because it wasn't in the April issue of the magazine because CBG were well known for doing April Fools jokes. But I was just like, that is so cool because I believe what you need to do is you need to activate the night mode cheat, and then when you do that on certain tracks, some of the side roads will be like unblocked.
Yeah.
And if you drive down them, the engine will cut out and the lights will go off. And then an alien UFO will come and sort of beam the car up. And I think is it played on? There's a famous case from the US where a couple were abducted in the 50s or 60s. I believe it's a play on that.
Yeah, Betty and Barney Hill. Yeah, so
that's it. Yeah,
most famous description of alien abductions in the 60s. I think it would have been. So it's obviously it was very much at the peak of X-Files fanship as well at this point,
Oh,
mid
good point.
'90s.
Yeah,
So
good
it
point.
was very much that. But also, again, we're going back to something which we always talk about every podcast because of the fact that we are so obsessed. The Dreamcast is a game called Speed Devils, and one of the stages on Speed Devils is Area 51.
Yeah.
And I always remember the first time you see the UFO. Spoiler alert! If those of you haven't played a 24-year-old racing game, 22-year-old racing game, sorry. There's a stage when you see the UFO, and the first thing that came to my mind when I first played it was, it's like Colin McRae,
Yeah.
which is says about the lasting effect of a I'm sure just a minor Easter egg the game had.
Right, Mike. The time has come to give our thoughts on this game, our final thoughts, and give it a score out of 10, as we want to do on this podcast. But before we do, I've got some professional reviews from magazines of the period. The first one is a review from CVG, issue 201. And it's a 2001 then. It's issue 201 from August 1998. That's the one with the Banjo-Kazooie cover, famously. Ed Lomas wrote, "In any other game, racing along roads on your own would be incredibly boring, but in Colin McRae Rally, it's about as enjoyable as video games get. The handling of all the cars is magnificent, the courses are brilliantly designed, the graphics and sound are very similar to Toka touring cars, i.e. excellent. Colin McRae Rally has the best car handling yet in a video game, and CVG awarded it 5 out of 5, or it's a high five, because they have that hand thing, the hand system for scores. The second review I've got here is from the official UK PlayStation magazine. This was supplied by my friend Martin, who is a PlayStation magazine hoarder, fanboy, expert. Take from those descriptions what you will. But he sent me a screenshot of this review from Steve Farraher. Steve says, this is issue 35 of the official UK PlayStation magazine. "It may not take the genre to greater heights, but it pushes the boundaries of the off-road racer to somewhere near Gran Turismo. Racing fans must buy it." And this game was awarded 9 out of 10 and awarded with a Star Player Award. So, time for us now, Mike, to give our verdicts. I'll let you go first, as I always do. What's your verdict? And a score out of 10, please.
Yeah, so I think it's a perfect continuation of Codemasters' fantastic gameplay, right the way from their Micro Machines games on the Mega Drive. It has fantastic looks, and it plays well now, which is even better. I give it a 9 out of 10.
Didn't you say that Micro Machines was like your favourite game of all time or something?
Micro Machines 96 I will happily have in my coffin when I die, just because it's the greatest game ever made, and I will fight anyone who says it's not.
Wasn't expecting that. I'll have it in my coffin.
Yeah, yeah.
Brilliant.
Sort of grave goods, Tom.
What about
you've got to be
your,
buried with the things.
What about your entire Dreamcast collection? What's going to happen with it? I can imagine the size of your coffin is going to be like.
I'm selling a Dreamcast collection to pay for the funeral.
Oh God.
Well, I'm not, obviously.
My verdict, I echo everything you've just said and everything that was in the reviews. I just think it's a magnificent rally title, and one that obviously has far and wide inspiration for even modern rally games. It's just like a yardstick. It's the benchmark, isn't it, of console rally games. Yep. And for the fact that in modern day that games are still being likened to it, if they've got decent car handling, then that says it all, really. So yeah, it's for me, it's an absolutely stellar example of a console rally game, and for that reason, I give it, like you, Mike, I give it a 9 out of 10. So yeah, 9s all round. So yeah, that'll pretty much do it, I think, for this episode. Of course, no discussion of a game as important as Colin McRae Rally would be complete, though, without a final word about the great man himself. Anyone listening to this podcast will undoubtedly be aware that Colin McRae, along with his son and 2 others, were tragically killed in a helicopter accident in 2007. And it was an incident that shocked the world, really. But in this game series, as we've said, that still continues to this day with Dirt series and the Dirt Rally series on the current gen and PC. Colin McRae is remembered, quite rightly, as an icon of the sport, really, as an icon of motorsport.
Yeah, and I think through this game, actually, he's actually an icon in video gaming as well, ironically enough.
Indeed, yeah. On that somber note, then, it just remains for me to thank you, our listeners, for listening to another episode of Power Drifting, and to thank you, Mike, for joining me once again in the virtual cockpit. yeah, if you like what you've heard, and I'm talking to listeners now, Mike, not you.
Yeah, if you're right.
If you like what you've heard, please consider giving us a rating or a review on iTunes or a subscribe on YouTube, because you can find our episodes on there now as well. Or indeed, give us a follow on the old Twitter. It's at PowerDriftPod. And we'll see you out on the gravel in the next episode. Goodbye.
Goodbye.